It's great. Thank you, Nigel. Great to be with you today. Nearly wasn't, but there you go. It's, the elephant in every room at the moment is AI. Education, definitely. It is hugely topical in so many ways. And I'm sure most of the sessions and talks and discussions might touch on this over the next few hours. So it's really important. And what I find is very useful because not everybody in the room is going to be at the same level of understanding about AI. That's okay. I think it's kind of a thing that most people feel at this point they almost need to be. It's almost like you don't want to say you don't know what all the terms mean and what it all. But some people are very well versed, and I think we've got a really mixed audience here today. So I think it's really useful at the start of a day like this is to do a bit of level setting, right? Just talk a little bit about AI, what it is and what it is. And this is very much part of my role as AI ambassador to help demystify AI and give you guys the information, because some of you have it, some of you may not, some of you have a little bit, so that the conversations are a little bit more productive, right? Because we all know what we're talking about. I think at this point we've all agreed, AI is not a fad. It's not just a productivity tool that will meld into the background and we'll barely notice its existence. It's actually going to have a massive impact. It's been dubbed the fourth industrial revolution. And when something gets that kind of moniker, it's, we know what that means. It means it's going to be pervasive across all society. It's going to endure. It's not just a fad, a flash in the pan. Like, it's going to be as big as the internet and arguably more impactful on economies, on people, on all industries. So it's really important we understand what this is. So a lot of you kind of would have heard a lot of terms bandied around about AI. So it's useful to just, let's just define them, categorize them, and then it's better to have a different kind of conversation. So you can think about what AI is. People confuse it and conflate it with automation. It's not automation. The EU are doing a lot of effort to actually differentiate it from automation. So AI is where it's where a machine can do a task that would normally require human intelligence. But there's learning in that, right? Because automation, the if, then, else idea is separate. Interestingly, the US government do conflate them. We in Europe do not. Most researchers and technologists wouldn't conflate them. Up until last year, about 12 months ago, we were generally talking about a concept called narrow AI, kind of like expert systems, right? It's called narrow AI. It's a terrible name. It's also called weak AI as opposed to strong AI, which I'll explain in a minute. But it's definitely not weak, and it's narrow is just not a great description of what it is. If you think about it, your Netflix recommender system, it's very powerful. It learns over time what you like and it shows you different things to somebody else. Your social media feed, again, it's learning about you and it's showing you something. Your speech recognition system, like an Alexa or a Google, they are expert narrow systems. A system that can identify a pathology in an X-ray or an MRI, that's an expert system. What it needed was data, a lot of data, especially when we're talking about deep learning, the more recent, the last 10 years of implementation of AI. But what it does is it takes expert knowledge, curated data, to perform a task that can perform what a human can do, so it can automate it, but it can actually do a hell of a lot more than that. And that's really important. It actually can almost do more than human intelligence. It's already been shown to do better detection, better analysis. It can take in more dimensions of data over longer periods of time, a large data sets, and crunch them and come up with something that the human brain can't actually quite get there. So to say it just performs human tasks is, it's narrow, but it's deep, right? So that's kind of useful to know. So up until last year, most of the AI systems you would have read about, talked about, were narrow AI systems. Even the EU AI Act pretty much was only talking about narrow AI systems. And then around September last year, we started looking at the generative AI. And first of all was the imaging. And you remember the Pope in the puffer coat, right? That was the first kind of, whoa, what the hell is that like? Is that real, really? And that kind of started to come into our consciousness. And then about late last year, at the very end of last year, we had ChatGPT. And ChatGPT basically just put an interface on these very large models that have been around for a few years, the evolution of them. But the interface itself was remarkable because it put it into the hands of everybody on the planet, much like the image processing did. You put a prompt in, just a line of text, a description, and it would generate something, but it's something new, and it would pass a plagiarism filter. And that's really interesting. So that just suddenly blew open the doors a little bit. It's also called generative AI, but the generative AI, like Stability AI and those and ChatGPT, are general purpose because they can be used across all industries. The same system can be used in law and medicine and, every subject, history, science, so it's general purpose. Generative AI, but general purpose AI, right? Then under the hood, these GPT models you often hear people talking about, they're called foundation models now. Again, a new term. If you actually search before, about a year or two ago, we weren't talking about foundation models. In academia, we didn't talk about foundation models. The concept was there, but the term hadn't been coined. So foundation models are the GPT models. You can actually license, your organization can license, and you can fine tune on your own data, your own expert system, but you're taking a general purpose generative AI system and you're fine tuning it to your own task. Hugely powerful in any organization. And actually not a massive amount of work. Obviously you'd need experts to help with that, but it's not like you've got to start from the beginning. And people are finding a huge amount of power, taking every document their organization has ever written, fine-tuning an LLM on it, and now you have your own bespoke ChatGPT thing for your organization. Depends what it is. That's massively powerful, and there's going to be an awful lot of that, more of that. And that's so you got general purpose back to something more narrow, and then you've got the AGI. So AGI is artificial general intelligence. That's the super intelligence. That's the scary one, right? That's the one existential threat. Can do great harm. The interesting thing about that is, and to be honest, even the ChatGPT and all those, we didn't think ChatGPT and the generative AI stuff and the foundation models, we knew of the concept, but it was there, it was coming, but everybody is surprised. And even researchers like me have been in this field nearly 25 years. The founders of OpenAI were surprised at how well it worked. The godfathers of AI were surprised at how well it worked. And it's actually a very short piece of code and was thrown, basically how it was done was scraping the internet, a digital vacuum cleaner, applying apparently 200 lines of code, some iteration, but very little. So unfiltered data, code, some back and forth with the model going, that's better than that kind of thing. But it wasn't filtered. It was more reinforced, right? Because that came at us so quickly, and really surprising how well it worked, it's kind of thrown into, up in the air a little bit, where or if AGI is possible. It's not possible now, so just so we're clear, we rack that off, it's not possible. But we're all doubting when, if, and how it will come about. Most people agree the GPT-style modelling, that kind of thing, will not lead to AGI, but just be assured that's not the only bit of progress we've seen in the field of AI. There's a lot of other approaches that are more likely to meet AGI than that is. We just don't know when and if. So the reason people are existential threat concerned is because we don't know how it's going to come and when it's going to come and if it's going to come, to be perfectly honest, but we need to be prepared for it. So just because what happens often, you see a lot of conflation of all these concepts, and people think what we have today is going to lead to that. It's not necessarily, it's the rapid pace of advancement and progress we've made that's really throwing everything into question. So I think all those terms are really, really useful for us all to know, well, when you're having these conversations, what are we actually talking about? And just to note, we don't need AGI to come about in order for AI to do great good and great damage. It doesn't need to wipe us out to really mess with the world. It could also do great things if we do it correctly. And getting that balance right is why there's so much conversation at the moment. So in the field of education, AI is everywhere, right? And automatically, everybody looks at ChatGPT, assessments, cheating, how are we ever going to, our whole education system is thrown into it. But if you think about how I just categorized them, that's just one category of AI, the ChatGPTs and the LLMs. So if you think about narrow AI systems and the AI that Soapbox has built and many other companies here in Ireland and abroad have built, were more narrow AI systems, expert systems, and designed predominantly around personalised learning paths, expert tutors, being able to do assessment, teaching, understanding what the students are doing, being able to do more nuanced learning, being able to feed back to the teacher, being able to do things like screening for difficulties, regular assessment, even like assessment that the student barely knows they're being assessed, practice, and then being able to tune teaching, being able to tune products, being able to feed back to the teacher what's working, what's not, being able to feed back, and in the case of the US, it's like a school district, being able to feed back to the people who are making the products about what's working and what's not. There's a lot of power in being able to take AI and level the playing field in some ways. You think of an overcrowded classroom and not every child, a teacher always would like to do more assessment, would like to have more individual progress, but AI can help that. And it can help in the case where not everybody has access to low student-teacher ratios, after-school tutors, helpful parents at home, English not being their first language. You can see how that more individualized help can really help in the world for education. And there's probably many other examples here today in the room about how AI is being used to help in education. When we think about the LLMs, it's really thrown everything up in the air. The good part of it is I recently told somebody who at 50 has gone back to college, and I showed her how to use ChatGPT, and I was going, it's like having an expert, a tireless expert in front of you. You can bug them and ask them question after question and to drill down. What an amazing tool to give somebody. Maybe somebody never gets to go to college, but they can educate themselves to a certain point with these type of things. Not to the point of a full formalized education system, but a tool to help. And that's where the productivity aspect comes in. And in the working world, it's hugely helpful, particularly people with dyslexia. You're leveling the playing field for people like that who struggle to write on a blank page. So you're having all these excellent problems. And then you have, conversely, the problems around cheating. That is a real problem, right? Are kids ever going to be able to write for themselves, critical thinking, But conversely, AI can help to ensure the integrity. It's going to take work. It's not like the technology doesn't exist, but around behavioral analytics, you can use actually the LLMs to create live questioning that somebody couldn't possibly have prepared for and change the questions based on the answers to drill down on someone's knowledge, and then together with a little bit of security and analytics on maybe their style of writing or what they've said before, or what we know that LLMs produce, you can get to something more like an oral assessment or a live assessment, a defense of a thesis, if you want. And AI can help that. Are we likening it to the calculator when we all, there was resistance to, but now it's used and now we've leveled up and everybody moves on? It's something we're just going to have to work with. It's not going away. I think that's the simple thing. To be able to ban it is a really challenging thing to do, but to turn our whole education system upside down now, and be able to try and look at it, it's not going away. How can we use this tool to help with critical thinking, to help with progress in all aspects of teaching? I think that's really important. And I'd like to just talk briefly on that, because I think in education, some of the issues and the controversies we talk about with AI are actually really probably more important in education. Some of the issues are errors. Why do we care if it gets it wrong? What is really the problem? People are kind of liking it to having to feel, well, there's a couple of outliers. There's really an issue. You are now implementing models at scale. And I think the scale is the really, really important thing. You're going to have the same model. It's probably going to evolve. If you don't get it right, you don't have it assessed, you aren't sure that it's serving the population the way it's supposed to, you can do a lot of damage. Telling a kid they're right when they're wrong, it's not very educational. And telling them they're wrong when they're right is hugely damaging to their confidence and teaching and education in general and their future prospects. So this whole issue around bias is a really important one to address. And I have had people ask me, but surely, again, this is the outliers. There's some outliers, but surely the benefits outweigh the couple of... It's not an outlier. If you're talking about it not working well for an accent or a dialect or somebody from a socioeconomic background versus somebody else, that's not outliers. That's a lot of people there to talk about. We have to get this right. And I think when you convey to people the importance of it, often the education example is one of the most important ones. And it's actually why the EU AI Act have actually deemed high-risk education. Because if you impact somebody's future, be it through a financial decision, through a recruitment, hiring, promotion, or their education, you're going to impact the rest of their life potentially. So that's why we have to keep humans at the center when we think about these things. So bias is really interesting, right? So, no AI model is born bias. It's just an algorithm, right? It isn't bias. It's bias because of what we feed it. So if I flip back to the ChatGPT example I talked about there, it was a digital vacuum cleaner that vacuums in the text of the internet, right? Or the images. Unfiltered. Some feedback, but minimal, if you think about the impact of what these things can do. That means the internet, as we know, is a bit of a cesspool, right? 4chan, any forum, any comment section, you have decades worth of bias there. So you build a model with new technology, you are potentially propagating those biases into the future if you're not careful, right? But then on the flip side of that, humans are biased. There was a study in the US that showed that different human expert assessors differed with each other about 18% of the time on literacy assessments. So 18% of the time, and they attributed a lot to what somebody would deem as correctly answered, And a lot of it then, the question then is that bias? Is that because you didn't like the style of the answer? Do you differed with each other? So we have a massive problem with the issue of bias if systems aren't built correctly, and they can be. We spent a lot of time in Soapbox thinking about that problem to make sure it would work for everybody. And there are certifications you can get where somebody helps you with your auditing process to make sure you're achieving this on how you build it, but also on how you test it. But to be able to do that, you have to think very carefully about how you build these things. So you can't just mindlessly taking in legacy data that may have had biases in it. It's a quick way to do it, but if you're going to cause problems in the future, that's a real issue, right? So that idea of bias, we have the opportunity of building models correctly that could actually potentially be objective decision making, taking the human bias out of it if built and tested correctly. That's an opportunity. But right now we think about AI as bias. It's not. Lazy AI is bias, right? Then there's issues that we have around IP. If a model can give a summary of a book, it has ingested the book. Who owns the IP? Did they have the right to do that? If somebody then generates a story on the back of what it's learned through all those books and all those screenplays and all those things, who owns the IP? Is it the person who owns the model? Is it the person who wrote the prompt? It's the person who wrote the book. So all those issues, and it's definitely going to come into it in education as well when we use these tools, and all the education books have been ingested as well. And that is actually a big topic of discussion under the EU AI Act as well. Jobs is going to be huge, the skills. So on one hand, we have a need for skills in AI, and the other hand, we're a very real concern about taking jobs and what will it be replaced with? Will it be the same quality of jobs? What jobs? I mean, every company, if they were told productivity could be improved by using it, that's great, but productivity translates possibly to job loss. We can all ideally say everybody's just leveled up, but what happens if that doesn't happen? And as a society, we need to think very carefully about it. The EU AI Act is there to put guardrails. It's not perfect, but those guardrails at the moment are super important because of what I talked about early on with the AGI and when it's coming. So there's a lot of people who will push back going, it's too early. You can't really regulate right now. We don't know what that's going to look like. Yeah, that's dangerous. But now, let's just, regulation stifles innovation. very convenient arguments for people who want to move fast and break things. And if you're going to break that thing and it's someone's life and someone's future prospects, that's a big thing to break. So this is more powerful. I mean, we kind of like messed it up with social media, right? There virtually is no regulation still, even though we know it impacts teenagers' lives, their depression, their anxiety, particularly girls. Like, we know that. There is zip out there to address it. We can't make the mistake again with AI. AI is way too powerful and it's going to have, well, we're only at the start of it. So some people will push back and go, but we're only at the start of it. How can we possibly regulate it? If you keep human at the center, and the idea is, people say, oh, what does that mean? Human values, and human values are different all over the world. Generally speaking, don't. You know, an objective system. It doesn't matter if your society raises up one person over another. Objectively, you look at a CV, you look at an assessment. And if you can objectively assess them, you can layer on your prejudice after that if you want. You know, heavily weight somebody after. I mean, that's almost irrelevant to the argument. It's about being objective if you can, and particularly in the space of education. So when we talk about the EU AI Act, what it does is categorise into high risk, medium risk and low risk effectively. And it's around data privacy and governance, transparency, that's about are you using AI. Explainability is a key one, and that's actually one of the biggest issues almost. It's not that AI can't be explainable, a lot of it is not at the moment, the way it's been built. And security and safety and sustainability, all those things come into it. But what a lot of people don't realise is that a lot of AI won't actually fall into the high-risk use case. Very little AI will actually fall into it. So all the consternations about regulation stifling innovation, actually it's only the ones that affect finance, employment, education. There's some banned use cases around biometrics, emotional manipulation, social scoring, things like that. But at the end of the day, what they're actually trying to effectively regulate kind of makes sense. If you look at a fintech sector, that's a heavily regulated sector, as is biotech, medtech, and nobody would ever deny any of those cannot innovate. They innovate very well. So all we're asking, and all the regulation's trying to do, is just to say, look, when it affects somebody, just take a moment. Take some steps, think about how you build it, think about the impact, test it, get it independently verified and release to market. Now, the one thing that will be a problem, if we don't adequately resource the regulators. If you have a thinly stretched regulator system and they're trying to address it, it is a perfect way to give people the opening to say, your regulation stifles my innovation. If we regulate and we staff and we make it seamless, it's very possible. It's done in many sectors. We get it wrong and you're going to impact a lot of people's life, and it's going to be very hard to unpick once that's done. So in education, more than anything, I think we have the opportunity here to build something that can level the playing field, give access of quality education to a lot of people despite resources, challenging resources or people's personal circumstances. There's a lot of risks, and I understand one of the biggest challenges is going to be for the education system in how we manage this innovation that's already here. It's on every child's phone, on Snapchat. You can forget about your ChatGPT. They all have their personalized AI system that can help them with their homework right there. But it's not going away. The knee-jerk reaction is to ban it and shut it down, but I think most people realise at this point we have to figure out how to work with it, possibly work with other AI systems, and there's many innovators here in the room who can take this opportunity to help address what's now here and is not going back in the box, to be able to innovate. And Ireland has a great opportunity to lead in this, given our education system, given our researchers, our innovators, and all the companies that are here together, to build something that can really challenge and address some of the biggest issues with AI in education. And I think that's a fantastic reason to have an event like this today. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for listening. I hope that was helpful.
Can we ask a couple of questions?
Oh, yeah, of course,
yeah. Patricia, there's one question that came while you were talking, and I think it opens up a whole new ballgame, which would be very helpful if you could give us your thoughts. What factors would be needed for AGI to realistically happen?
an evolution of the technology that doesn't exist today. It's, what it needs to do is to be able to, the idea of AGI is that where it learns itself. So it makes a jump, right? So I think somebody described ChatGPT really well recently, and they called it a stochastic parrot. And that's actually, to me, that really resonated in what it is. It's brilliant. It is amazing. It's like the most confident person that's full of BS, right? They speak really well and really intelligently, but there are some major gaps in how it's built. So, but the problem, the opportunity, I still haven't figured out why we want AGI, but that's for another day. There are many people working on it. So the GPT technology, that transformer technology, that paper was only released in 2015. There are other approaches that have built on that are adjacent to that, and it's the leap from there into this. But it's almost like what they have achieved by being able to use this digital vacuum cleaner on the internet with a very, arguably a short amount of code and some iterations and feedback. It was the feedback that really helped too. They have moved the field on, and it's not going back. So now the next thing, it's possibly adjacent but forward, but how much forward it is to get that AGI. But there's a lot of people trying. There is a lot of people the AGI is like this goal. If you ask them why, most people couldn't answer. Just because we can is generally the answer. Yeah.
And there is the issue of just because we can.
Should we?
Yeah. Can I just ask what advice? There are people in this room. Some have dived in quite a lot, are on the edge, looking down and thinking, where do I start? What advice would you give them? Where do you start?
Yeah, sure. Look, a really simple way. Actually, has anybody here not tried ChatGPT? Yeah? So most people have, yeah?
Yeah.
If you haven't tried it, try it. And if you can, try GPT-4, not the free one. Pay €20 just for a month. You can cancel it. It is unbelievable. I did 3 and 3.5, and then I did 4, and that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And then ask it something that you are an expert in, that that doesn't. And then and then start peeling it back. Or then ask it something that you've always struggled with. You're sitting in a meeting and everybody's going on about this concept, and you're just nodding along going, yeah, sure. But you never quite got it. You never quite got it. Go ask it. And then what happens is you ask it a question, it tells you, and then just drill in a little bit. And you don't have to rewrite the prompts. This is just a little tip. Don't rewrite. Just say, try again, but this time, give me more information about X. And watch it go down and down and down. And it will actually blow your mind on stuff that you've probably always had a peripheral knowledge on. And then you start unpicking about what is possible with this. And I think the power of a lot of this will be these models in the hands of people with expert knowledge, and it will start doing things that we didn't possibly conceive, or the creators didn't possibly conceive. So I think some of the power of it will be what this does, but with your own perspective on the world, your own experience, your knowledge, you can actually build on top of it. So even all the startups of the world, like most of them now have got, I think most investors would say you don't see a deck without the mention of AI anymore, Sure. It's almost like we're all starting from here now. Before we were starting from here, and some people were doing AI. Now, most people are starting with these GPT models and building out from there. But it's still a lot of value to be had in that. Particularly if you because before a startup would have an advantage, particularly with your expert knowledge, your experience, a particular stance you have, you can still do that.
Yeah.
You're just doing it a level on. And you can learn pretty quick on that.
The key word is chat. It's iterative.
Yes.
It's not Google. It's not a search engine. It's designed for you to come back at it and say, that's too complicated. Simplify that.
Yes.
I don't understand this bit.
Explain it like I'm 5 is a great way to ask it. It's really good. And you go, no, simpler.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yes.
Or then go write this letter to somebody and make it very lawyery. You can actually use words like that. Or don't make it less douchey or something like that. You can actually use those things when it does start coming back. Going, no, that's a bit much.
Yes.
But do play with it, because I think the power of it is in the playing of it, and then it does spark people's imagination then about what's possible.
Completely. And I think that exploration, you can't explore it standing outside, imagining what it's like. I think that's very good advice.
Very easy, yeah.
Dive in.
And look, most OpenAI and Google and all those guys actually have online courses, 1 hour, 2 hour courses about prompt engineering.
Yes.
Really worth it if you're interested.
Yes. There's a very good LinkedIn Learning program on how to write correct prompts, and he does it live. So he shows a bad prompt and then the results from a good prompt, and how you interrogate from the first prompt to get something more useful.
And then it helps everybody have a conversation about what's possible. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yes. So Patricia, that was absolutely fantastic. That's such a great overview. So simple and straightforward. Something really complicated and difficult, but you managed to outline it for us. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, no problem.
And thanks for struggling to get here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.